I think this is going to be a fun episode, but I want to tell you what to expect. First, we're going to start off with the TBR and a specific reading schedule. Then I'll get into the book haul, which includes purchases, things that were given to me as gifts, stuff I found at a little free library. Following that, we'll do upcoming episodes and specials to give you a little preview of what's coming. And then I'm going to do a really quick recent episode wrap-up. In case there's anything that you missed, I'll let you know about it. First up is the TBR and reading schedule. This is a portion of my TBR that I've really filtered out in terms of what I'm really expecting to read before the summer. The list is ambitious, but I'm really going to try to stick to this schedule. First up is Dhalgren, Gravity's Rainbow, and the Sparrow. Let's start with Gravity's Rainbow. The reason I'm starting with these ones are these are what I'm currently reading, sort of. Actually, I'm waiting for the Sparrow because there's maybe some sort of science fiction alliance thing going on with that, and I want to do a review of that. It hasn't arrived yet, and I'd finished reading Diaspora recently, and I'd also just started Gravity's Rainbow. But because the Sparrow isn't here yet, I picked up Dhalgren for a third read-through. I've read this twice already, and it's an amazing, amazing book, so I'm excited to be reading this. And I wasn't planning to read these two things at the same time because they are both quite thick and very, very dense and verbose. Dhalgren is just an amazing book, though, and I'm already tearing through it. The problem is when the Sparrow arrives, I'll be reading this, Dhalgren, and the Sparrow. I'll have my hands full. This is taking me a while. I've sort of committed to reading 4 pages a day. Sometimes I'm getting 4 pages, sometimes I'm getting 6. I think the most I've gotten is 8. This is a very difficult one to read for a long period of time. What's interesting about this one is it's set around the time of the end of World War II, and is focused on the bombings by the Germans using the V-2 rockets, a really advanced technology for the time, to bombard London. And it's really weird because these bombings, where they take place, happen to coincide with where another character has his, let's just say, romantic liaisons. It's not the easiest book to read. I don't think I could do more than 6 or 8 pages at a time. I'm enjoying the reading challenge. I don't know that this is going to turn out to be a book that I love, like in a top 50, but I think I'm going to enjoy the reading experience. I'm already enjoying it, but I'm definitely not kind of pulled into the story just yet. These aren't meant to be book reviews today. I just want to kind of give you an idea of what I'm doing, but just a really brief introduction to Dhalgren. What I'll do is I'll just start with where I am in the book. I'm about 160 pages into this. And there is this Midwest city called Bologna. It's sort of cut off from the rest of the world. Maybe there was some sort of catastrophe, which we don't quite know what it is. And our main character, we're going to call him Kid. He doesn't know his name. He's got some mental stuff going on as well. But somebody he meets, an engineer, gives him the name Kid. And he's sort of wandering around trying to make sense of things and what's the purpose of his life, what's going on in this very strange fictional Midwest town, Bologna. Once Mary Doria Russell's The Sparrow arrives, I'll add that into the mix as well, because like I said, I want to read that along with some other members of the Science Fiction Alliance and maybe release some stuff all around the same time. I'll talk more about that novel when I've actually read it and I do my review on it. Hopeland by Ian McDonald. My most anticipated 2023 release is probably Hopeland. This will be my first Ian McDonald read since his 2009 release. The excellent The Dervish House. It's billed as a sci-fi and speculative fiction book, and it hosts as an initial setting the riots in 20th century London. Next is Barrayar and Shards of Honor. These are early books in Lois McMaster Behold's Vorkosigan Saga, a huge series of books and stories mostly following the Vorkosigan clan and their exploits and adventures around the universe. The series features heavily in space opera and military science fiction, and is hugely action-packed. This will just be my second time reading through the series, but I only think I'm going to actually probably read just those first 2 books. Then I should soon be getting my copy of Lords of Uncreation. This is book 3 of the Final Architects series. I've already read books 1 and 2, Shards of Earth and Eyes of the Void by Adrian Tchaikovsky. They were excellent. Shards of Earth does a good job of like introducing the characters and the worlds and everything, and it's slow for like 200 pages just because Tchaikovsky put so much work into like letting you figure this world and these characters out. And then kind of the second half of the book is very unputdownable. And because that first book did a lot of the legwork, Eyes of the Void, the second book, really is just like action the whole way through. It's a great, great space opera. And again, military science fiction, just like kind of not like the Vorkosigan Saga, but it has those 2 elements. The Lords of Uncreation finishes out the series, and it is going to be like a complete finish, Tchaikovsky says. And I really am looking forward to this. It's the setting is, in the future, Earth has been destroyed, as have many other planets, because these moon-sized aggressors, the architects, have come and they've destroyed worlds. They're huge. They're like the size of the moon. They turn these planets inside out, and they're told to resemble sculptures of flowers. So that's how dominant these beings are. And the first two books looked at, like, who are these architects? How can we face them? How can we defeat them? And who's pulling their strings? Because apparently somebody's pulling their strings. Well, we're going to find out in this final book. Then there's Red Rising, and this is set on a future Mars. You've got this character, Darrow, who is a young man, and I think he's actually 16. I've talked about this a lot on the channel, so I'm not going to give you a blurb on it now. You can check it out on my top 210 list. Several different guests have done cameos talking about all the different books of this series, but it's set on Mars, and it starts out with Darrow. He is a red, and it's a caste society. He's deep in Mars doing, some of the work of the terraforming and mining elements that are crucial. Meanwhile, not aware of what's really going on. And so there's some class divide there, and then him sort of finding a way to rise up through the ranks and maybe some revolution type stuff. And next we have Foundation. I've talked about Foundation a lot on this channel. It's one of my favorite science fiction books of all time. I've not done a review of it yet, and I'm not going to until I've reread the series. So I'm going to start with, I'll probably do books 1, 2, and 3. Foundation and Empire, and Second Foundation. These are phenomenal, phenomenal books. Big ideas from Asimov. Very accessible prose. Wooden characters, but I always say this about Foundation. If somebody tells you, yeah, Foundation's fine, but the characters are boring, it's not a book about characters, and it spans so much time that you're not with any character for any long period of time. Don't worry about this. This is all about the ideas. This is like the best that science fiction has to offer. Check this one out. Harry Seldon is this genius who has created a whole new subject of science called psychohistory, which is like statistics, it's sociology, it's history, it's mathematics, all rolled together, and it's a predictive science. And what happens is the Galactic Empire is coming into a dark ages. He sets up these foundations to try to guide humanity to just make these dark ages much, much shorter and then much less suffering. In the second book, we get one of the most interesting characters in all of science fiction, the Mule. Also on the TBR, and very likely to be read very soon, is a reread of Peter Watts's Blindsight. I've talked about this book a lot on the channel, but I am due for a reread. Blindsight is set not too far future, and it features a first contact encounter and a conflict with non-self-aware aliens from another star system. Blindsight was very much a deep dive examination into human consciousness. Once I've read these books and done my reviews on them, I'm also going to reread Xenocide and reread Ender's Shadow. These are books in the Ender's Saga and the Ender's Shadow Saga. Recently, I reviewed Speaker for the Dead on the channel. Check that review out. That was a phenomenal, phenomenal book and a even better reread. And I do want to pick up Xenocide, but I can't pack all of this. I can't have all my reading be Ender Wiggin reading, but I do want to not have too much space between Speaker of the Dead and when I read Xenocide again. And there's a specifically part of Xenocide where there's a character tracing wood grain. Doesn't sound that exciting, but it's a part of the book that has stuck with me for decades. So I'm eager to get back to that. That's the second book. That's the third book in the Ender series by publication date. Then there's Ender's Shadow, which is exactly almost the exact same time that Ender's Game takes place. And in Ender's Shadow, we're actually following Bean, who is one of the classmates of Ender at Battle School, an integral character in the Ender's Game book. But he's the star of the show in Ender's Shadow. And it's not really just a retelling of Ender's Game. It's its own story, and it's really captivating. And it actually improves upon Ender's Game in some ways. Permutation City by Greg Egan. Egan lays it out. If we can copy everything, the brain, every neurotransmitter sent from the brain, if it can be uploaded into a virtual space, is the simulation basically a human? And then what happens when these virtual copies become self-aware? What if they can't handle being a copy? Can virtual reality be made the actual reality? There's a whole lot of quantum physics, quantum universes, and exploration of consciousness in this awesome Greg Egan novel. So that's my immediate TBR. And I've done TBRs before, and the idea is I want to read these. They're on my to-be-read list. I don't know when I'll get to them. That TBR, I really expect to read those in that order, so those should be coming up soon on the channel. be on the lookout if any of those are ones that you're really looking forward for a review on. Let me know in the comment section too if any of those are ones that you are really eager for. Next up is the book haul. First up again is Gravity's Rainbow. I just bought this copy because I love it. I love this cover. It's so cool and it looks beautiful. It's in great shape and I need it too because this is such a big book and it's going to take me a long time to read it. This might take me 3 or 4 months, so don't be in a hurry to get this review from me. But this is the copy I'm reading. As you can see, the front cover has already come off, so that's why I've got the backup copy. Plus, this one was okay, but I like that cover a lot more. And I also got this, the Gravity's Rainbow Handbook, a key to the Thomas Pynchon novel by Robert Crayola. This is a really thin piece, so if you're reading this book and you were looking for something like really substantial, this is kind of thin. I still recommend it though, and I'm using it. It starts out and it gives like a little background, but then you get sort of these, descriptions of the characters, which is really important because there are so many characters and it's difficult to keep track of them, especially in this book. It's very difficult to keep track of who's talking, and I think Pynchon does that on purpose, and you're left wondering, and it can change like that to like whose perspective you're looking at. This has been really helpful, so that's why I got that. And it's really making the reading experience more enjoyable. If I just went in without this, it would be okay, but this is really helping a lot more. I also have a new copy of Day of the Triffids. This was sent to me by a client and a friend, Brian. Every Christmas he sends me a book, something he thinks I haven't read or that I would like to read or something we've maybe talked about. I just recently did a review on this, so it's good to have this copy. The other copy I had is fine. It has sort of like the green comet shower going on. This one has like a really nice smooth cover. John Wyndham, The Day of the Triffids. This is set in London back in like, what was it, the 60s, late 60s, early 70s. There's a meteor shower basically. People have all lost their sight, which sucks because wandering around are these triffids, which are plants that can uproot themselves and walk around, and they have these huge stingers that will whip you and like you're poisoned, you're dead. That's it. Luckily for the main character and a few other people, they were in the hospital or something else. Like the main character, he's bandaged, and so he takes off the bandage. So he missed witnessing the comet shower when everybody went blind. So he's able to kind of wander around London, make some relationships, and is looking on the lookout for the Triffids. I also bought for myself this copy of Farewell Earth's Bliss by D.G. Compton. This is a really short one. It's a quick read. It's about 175 pages, 180 pages. And I got this one because I've probably talked about this before. I actually talked about it last year. I still haven't put it up yet, but I am working on a Mars week. It's going to be 5 days, maybe 6 days of Mars books. There's going to be essential Mars fiction, essential Martians fiction, Mars TBR and book haul probably. There will be top 10 Mars fiction. There is rating Mars with stars, where I have a number of Mars books that I've read and I'm giving them star ratings, something I don't often do. I did do that, I think, on my time travel week or maybe on my cyberpunk week. Look for those two. I had 5 days in a row of cyberpunk episodes, 5 days in a row of time travel episodes. You're going to be sick of seeing my face that week because you will have 5 days, maybe 6 days in a row of nothing but Mars science fiction books. Back to Farewell Earth's Bliss. I'm excited for this one, and the reason I picked it up is it's been a long time since I read this one, and I really like it. And I'm sort of trying to really promote it too because I think it's a very overlooked classic, and I'm not going to reread the whole thing probably, but I'll probably skim through it just to refresh my memory so that I can do a good enough job of talking about it for Mars Week. I also picked up Rainbow Mars by Larry Niven. This is another one I've read and I will need to refresh myself with. This is a compilation of mostly humorous short stories featuring a main character, Svets, who jaunts around in a time machine retrieving items from the past. I'm going to talk about this one on Rating Mars with Stars. I'm also going to refresh myself on The Martian Rainbow by Robert L. Forward. This is a thriller with stuff like Wars on Mars, a megalomaniac, power-hungry, charismatic ruler, good versus evil, identical twin stuff. Suspend disbelief and just enjoy. This will show up on Rating Mars with Stars. Also sent to me by my friend Brian, and I definitely haven't read this one, is AI 2041 by Kai-Fu Lee. This is a nonfiction book about how AI is poised to upend our society. This is something that I'm very interested in. How close are we to AI knowing us better than we know ourselves? Kai-Fu Lee is the former head of Google China. That's not a bad person to go to for some speculation and some answers. I and Gomorra and Times Square Red, Times Square Blue by Samuel R. Delany. Gomorra is a compilation of shorts. I've only read about half of it. Times Square Red, Times Square Blue is a very adult nonfiction New York experience. I wanted to get these because I've been on such a Delany kick. I've always been on a Delany kick. You can see a lot of reviews of his books on my channel, like Empire Star, Babel 17. I'm currently reading Dhalgren, like I mentioned. I also have a review of Nova up on here as well. So check all those out if you're interested in Delany. In a couple weeks, I'll talk about this shortly. I'll have an episode that talks a lot more about Delany and where to start with him as a must-read author of science fiction. Must-read author. And the reason I picked these up is because I've been rereading Dhalgren, and it's just, I'm surprised at how much it reminded me of how much I loved it. Like, I'm not surprised I loved it because I loved it before, but I'm reading it like, did I love it this much? It's just such a captivating read, and I'm like, okay, let me get my hands on everything Delany that I haven't read. And like I said, Gomorra, I've only read about half of it, and they're short stories, so that's easy to kind of read a little bit here and there. And I'm interested in Times Square Red, Times Square Blue because it's not science fiction, but Delany's such an interesting person, and I truly feel like, especially reading Dhalgren, like, okay, he himself has probably had similar situations or experiences to the things I'm reading about. So let me read a little bit more of this kind of nonfiction side of his life. Very, very interesting to me. I also picked up a copy of Robert Silverberg's Dying Inside, and I got this because it was recommended to me by Peter Watts. It hasn't appeared on this channel, but if you remember from my top 210 list, Peter Watts came on and did like 5 cameos talking about books, including Dhalgren, so perfect segue into this one. And he had mentioned Robert Silverberg, who had only really read his short stories. So I asked him, what Silverberg would you recommend for me? And he said Dying Inside. So I picked this up, and I absolutely intend to read it because I think we have very similar tastes. He had several books when we were kind of figuring out what he was going to talk about on the top 210 list. We had several books in common, like really high up on the list. So this should definitely be a good one. And if you want to know what this is about, Peter Watts.
Dying Inside by Robert Silverberg. Sorry I don't have a copy to hold up. I loaned mine out to somebody, they never gave it back. I've always loved Robert Silverberg's prose. He's one of maybe 4 people that I have consciously ripped off when trying to develop my own writing style. And pretty much all of his books are gorgeously wrought on a prose level. But to me, Dying Inside was something new. It was a literary SF novel placed firmly in the present day, which was back then the 70s. With no tech, no aliens, none of the usual SF trappings. Just a socially awkward telepath who makes a menial living by ghostwriting term papers for university undergrads, squandering the greatest gift anyone ever had on mere subsistence. Dying Inside tells the story of what happens as that gift begins to fade. It stretched my brain without resorting to a single special effect.
These next 2 were also sent to me as gifts by my friend Whitney from the Secret Sauce of Storycraft. She sent me Beggars in Spain and The Mountain in the Sea. And I didn't think I was going to be able to get to these very quickly, but I got to this one pretty much right away because I had it at my office and I was caught at the office without the books I was reading and said, oh, well, I need a book to read right now. So I picked this up. I had it there. So thank you again, Whitney. And I did a review on this already. You can check it out on the channel. I had mixed feelings about this. Overall, it's probably the novel that I've done a review on that was like the most, I don't want to say panning or slamming, but it was like my most critical review just because the first half of the book suffers a little bit in terms of dialogue and character development. It's not to say it wasn't an enjoyable read. I did enjoy the read, but I did have some issues with it. Check out that review I did if you want to know more about that. And the basic premise is that there is technology in the not too distant future where embryos can be tinkered with so that we don't have to sleep. And this isn't really available to everybody, but there is a wealthy individual who wants it for his daughter, gets that technology. Other families can like do genetic engineering for their children for like eye color and stuff like this, but there's only very few who don't have to sleep. And so having this ability to not have to sleep gives you a lot of advantages because when everybody else is sleeping, you can be taking tennis lessons, you can be working with a tutor and getting smarter. And then it really is interesting how this plays into the greater world. How do sleepers relate to non-sleepers? And there's definitely some conflict there. For The Mountain in the Sea, Again, this is kind of going to be a wild card on my TBR because I do want to get it in this year and maybe even before the summer in that list I already told you. So I may try to sneak it in there. I'm just not sure if it's going to fit in there or not. But if you're curious about this one, go over to Whitney's channel. She talked about this one, and here's a little bit of that.
This book was a first contact novel that isn't aliens. It's actually octopus. And we didn't really recognize that they were sentient until suddenly we do. I can't really explain it any better.
Finally, 1984 by George Orwell. I have like 5 copies of 1984. I did not have this copy, but I found this in the little free library. Every now and then I find something interesting in the library. When I did my top 150 episode a few years ago, I think I showed every single book. I had every single book, even if I didn't show it, that was mentioned in my top 150 episode. I didn't even try to do that on my top 210. Plus, I had like 100 cameos, so I didn't have to. But after the top 150, I was upset because I didn't have a copy of Ancillary Justice. And guess what? And I was talking to, I think, Rachel from the Shades of Orange about it, that I didn't have that book. The very next day, I kid you not, the little free library right next to my gym, I looked in it, the only science fiction book in there, Ancillary Justice, 1984. This is a dystopian future setting, at least for the time that George Orwell wrote the book. And it's all about, you've heard this, Big Brother is watching. The government, the party, Ingsoc is watching us. They're spying on us, not just what we do, but looking at our body language and trying to decipher how we speak. We're monitored at all times. We can't just go along and do as we're told. We must think in the way that Ingsoc wants us to think too. And if we deviate from that at all, guess what? You're going to be rounded up and you're going to be punished and you're going to be reconditioned. It's a very strong dystopian warning novel, obviously one of the most classic in that category. All right, now we're going to talk about episodes to look forward to on the channel. I'll rattle through this really quickly. I do want to say that I am releasing videos on Tuesdays at 7:40 a.m. and Thursdays at 1 p.m. as I've always been doing. For the Tuesday episodes, that's where I'm usually going to drop book reviews, and you can expect those book reviews will be anywhere from like 8 to 15 minutes in length. I try to keep them around the 10-minute mark. I'm also moving the musical parody that I do for those towards the end because I've had some feedback that people don't love that. At the beginning of the episode, that is like something that inspires me, brings me joy to create that, and I put a lot of time into creating those parodies, so I will put them at the end for those who really love it. And I think maybe they'll make more sense too, because now you'll have some context from the review that the lyrics might make a little bit more sense. I'd love to hear from everybody in the comments. What do you think about that? Have you noticed that I've moved it from the beginning to the end? Do you like that better? Do you miss it at the front end? Or do you hate the music? Do you think it diminishes what I'm talking about? I don't. I think it's something that I love to do, and I do it as a sign of respect and an honoring of the work, so to speak. But let me know. I'm curious to hear it. If you love it, let me know that too. That'll make me feel really good. I will mention that on Thursdays, that's usually when I put out my episodes that have more than one book involved. So something like, when I've done difficult sci-fi or mind-bending sci-fi, things like that, where maybe I have 5 to 10 books, top 10 lists, things like that. Those are usually going to go on Thursdays as the Thursday episode. Coming up soon, I will have Mars Week. I have most of it filmed already. I probably have to film 2 more episodes of that, which means that probably that's going to make it into April because I already have some stuff in the queue. Probably in April, you'll see a full week of Mars science fiction from me. Then we're going to have an episode on modern cyberpunk. I did the whole cyberpunk week last year, several episodes on that, including a top 10. There's a lot of kind of classic things in there and stuff from of course, the 70s and the 80s, and maybe a little bit dipping into the 60s. But I want to do, I've had some people ask me for modern cyberpunk recommendations. So I'm going to try to do like cyberpunk recommendations, books from mostly the 2000s and beyond. Well, I guess not beyond because we're still in the 2000s, but so books from the 2000s, 2010s, 2020s. Then we're going to have another mind-blowing sci-fi episode. I feel like I could just make mind-blowing science fiction episodes because so much of science fiction is mind-blowing. And I read of a lot of authors like Greg Egan and Samuel R. Delany who always put out mind-blowing stuff. Philip K. Dick as well, Gene Wolfe, you name it. Also coming up soon, I'm going to have funky sci-fi reads for you, some suggestions for that. More slump busters, books that can break you out of a reading slump, at least according to me. Books that I hope my kids will read before they go to college. I'm also going to do some book reviews coming up, which you should be aware of. The next one, if it's not up already, will be Diaspora. and we'll eventually get to Dhalgren when I get that finished. The Sparrow should be coming up. I also have something secret and special coming up for April 1st. That's April Fool's Day. I'm going to have something really special. I will be interviewing one of the biggest names in all of science fiction. Think 1950s science fiction. So stay tuned for that. I think that's going to be really, really interesting to show you. Thank you for watching. I'm Michael Everts, and this is Fit to be Read.